The most successful coaches never stop learning. They are committed to their personal growth and making themselves better. I'm Colby Donovan, and welcome to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. I'll speak with the world's most respected coaches, best-selling authors, and top business leaders to give you insight into their philosophies, lessons, and mindsets for you to apply to your own life. Head on over to coachingcoaches.co, where you can subscribe to this podcast and join some of the top coaches around the country who also enjoy our regular newsletter. My guest today is Ethan Kross, one of the world's leading experts on controlling the conscious mind. He's currently a professor at the University of Michigan, where he founded the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. He's also the author of Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. In this episode, we learn about what coaches can do to help reframe the negative self-talk we have with ourselves and help players do the same. Ethan walks us through examples of how he would handle different situations as a coach, including coaching a player who's reluctant to take advice, helping a player deal with negative self-talk when enduring a slump, and why he'd encourage players to have routines like tennis great Rafael Nadal. From time to time, I'm going to have others co-host episodes with me, and today I'm joined by one of my good friends and smartest people I know, Oliver Winterbone. Oliver's the director of coaches and executives at Wasserman, one of the premier talent management companies in the world. He previously spent 5 seasons in the front office of the Oklahoma City Thunder, most recently serving as director of player development. Before that, he worked for the University of Florida men's basketball program from 2010 to 2014, which is when we got to know each other. Oliver, I appreciate you joining me today, and I'm really excited for us to talk to Ethan.
Thanks, Colby. Really excited to be here. Really excited to chat with Ethan about Chatter.
And on that note, please enjoy the episode. Ethan, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, Colby. Thanks for having me on the show.
So this is a topic that, to me, relates to coaches, both to help their inner voice and then for them to work with their athletes to help their inner voice. So I think it's going to be a really great conversation. I think a fun place to start would be with a quote from the book. You said, using the mind to engage with our thoughts and feelings in the wrong way can lead professional athletes to lose the skills they've spent their careers perfecting. And that, to me, is encapsulated by a story you tell about a pitcher with the Cardinals. So I wanted to see if you could start it off by taking us back to October 3rd, 2000 with the playoffs between the Braves and the Cardinals.
Sure. So if we go back in time, there was a pitcher on the mound named Rick Ankiel, who was an up-and-coming phenom. And I don't use that term lightly, phenom. I don't mean he was just the next potential rookie of the year. I'm talking about a pitcher who many thought was going to had the potential to be one of the greatest pitchers of all time. And throughout that season, he was pitching like a phenom. It was just, and I remember watching him. I mean, it was just, took your breath away to see what this guy could do on the mound. And I'll say as a diehard Yankee fan from birth, maybe even pre-birth, it was not always fun to watch that. But then fast forward to the playoffs, you know, he takes the mound and you think the game's over before it starts because we know he's pitching. But he does something strange for Rick. He throws a wild pitch. And, you know, he threw that wild pitch and then he shrugs it off. And he winds up again, right? Wild pitches happen. But then he throws another and another and another. And we're talking like crazy wild pitches here. We're not talking about like just a little bit in the dirt before the plate. We're talking they go sailing over the catcher like I used to do shamefully, not just in Little League, but maybe high school as well, which is why I'm not a professional pitcher. One of the many reasons why I'm not a professional pitcher. And so Ankiel writes about this experience in his autobiography. And he talks about it in terms of his inner voice. He actually gives it a name, the monster. He talks about how the moment he threw his first wild pitch, he thought to himself, I just threw a wild pitch. And then he goes deeper and deeper into the internal monologue that starts percolating up, the inner critic, so to speak, that really sinks his performance in that game. It comes back, this monster, in a subsequent game, and it ultimately ends his career as a pitcher. He did manage to come back several years later as a reinvented outfielder, an all-star outfielder, which is quite remarkable. But here was a guy who had the potential to become the best pitcher ever, one of them, and it all unraveled due to his inner voice. This is not an isolated incident. While researching the book, I came across multiple examples of this across sports: baseball, basketball, tennis. Rafael Nadal, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, says the hardest thing he battles to do on the court is control the voices in his head. Now, to me, as a scientist, that is remarkable, right? Nadal is competing against the greatest athletes in the world, and he's not preoccupied with their fitness level, with the strength of their backhand. He's preoccupied with the internal conversation he's having with himself and wanting to master that. And I think that's a challenge that all athletes face, and I think is relevant to coaches too, to understand how they can help their athletes master that internal conversation.
So, Ethan, could you go into the definition of chatter?
Sure. So let me try to break it down in 90 seconds. Start the stopwatch now. Okay. So when we're experiencing distress, we tend to focus inward to solve a problem, whether it be distress about some jitters about whether I'm going to make the free throw, how am I going to return the serve, or, why did I get rejected or angry by someone else? Bad things happen. We tend to zoom in and think about the problem. Now, sometimes we focus on that problem, we come up with the solution, and we move on with our lives. In that case, you're using introspection and your inner voice positively. But a lot of the time, and in particular, under high performance and high stakes situations, our attempt to focus inward, to problem solve, backfires. And it doesn't lead us to find solutions. It leads us to worry, to ruminate, to catastrophize. It leads us to engage in a negative cycle of thinking and feeling that is ultimately destructive. And that's what chatter is, those negative thought loops where you're trying to figure out why something isn't working, but you're not coming up with any answers. I like the visual analog for me is of a gerbil on an exercise wheel that is running, but not getting anywhere. And that can be, there's a lot of science showing that when we get stuck experiencing that kind of harmful mental chatter, that undermines our ability to perform and make good decisions. It can influence negatively our social relationships. It can create social friction between ourselves and those we love. And it can significantly not improve, it can significantly undermine our physical health, right? It helps explain how the experience of stress gets under the skin in ways that are toxic and can lead to things like cardiovascular disease, some kinds of cancer, and other kinds of significant physical disorders. So chatter is not a good thing.
And so when we refer to chatter, we talk to ourselves, good and bad, all the time. But when we refer to it, we're talking about the negative aspect of that when we kind of start to spiral, correct? And can you talk about how often we do talk to ourselves? Because I thought that was shocking to me.
Yeah. So some people think that, yes, chatter is the dark side of the inner voice. Some people think they just want to get rid of the inner voice altogether. This is not something I advocate. The inner voice is an essential tool that we use throughout our lives to problem solve, to innovate, to create. Our ability to talk to ourselves, to silently, we should be clear with listeners, we're talking about silent self-talk here. The ability to use language to make sense of our lives, that's what distinguishes us in part from other animals. It allows us to innovate, to problem solve, to create. You don't want to get rid of your inner voice. You want to figure out how to harness it effectively so you don't get stuck in the negative thought spirals of chatter. There's some evidence that, there is evidence that we spend between 1/2 and 1/3 of our waking hours not focused on the present. So when we're not focused in the present, we're drifting away. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about the past. And research indicates that a lot of the time that we're thinking about the future and the past, we're talking to ourselves. We're verbally introspecting about those experiences.
So you talk about the toolbox, which is a lot of different ways. Either I can help myself handle chatter or I can help others handle chatter. So I think a fun way to frame this will just be giving you a lot of hypothetical situations and saying, how would you handle this, or how would you advise someone to handle this in this situation? So let's say I've got a player on my team, or just my team in general, and we are going to play a team that's better than us, more highly ranked than us. We are not expected to win or even come close, and players may view that as a challenge that's too much, and it can overwhelm them. How would you advise that coach, or how would you handle that to help them not experience chatter or combat chatter about that situation?
Well, how much time do we have? So, well, let me before I answer that, let me break down how I think about the tools that exist, because I think that'll be helpful, and then I'll dive in. So, chatter isn't a great thing. It's something I think most of us struggle with at times. It's an experience that I think is often particularly problematic for athletes and coaches too. Coaches experience, coaches are in a position to help others, their players, with their chatter, but they of course often have to deal with their own chatter as well, right? So I think it's relevant to coaches. There's a double relevance there. So the good news is that science-based tools exist for managing these internal conversations and for helping others do the same. And I like to break down these tools as falling into three different buckets. You kind of set me off to thinking buckets with the basketball talk earlier. So, one set of tools involves things that people can do on their own, ways of shifting the way they're thinking, they're talking to themselves that can be useful. Then there are what we might call people tools, which involve leveraging the power of our relationships with others, for example, our coaches or our friends or our loved ones, so that they can help give us chatter support to help us reduce those harmful conversations. And then the final category of tools consists of environmental tools, ways of navigating the physical spaces around us that can be useful for managing the conversations happening within us. And in my book, Chatter, I talk about the tools falling into those different buckets. And we won't get into all of them here because we don't have enough time, but I'll maybe just highlight a few that I think might be really relevant to the scenario you gave me.
And if you want them all, go buy the book.
So, okay, so we've got this. So here's one tool that I find to be, one finding I find to be really powerful. One of the things we've learned is that we are much better at advising other people on their problems than we are at advising ourselves. We call this Solomon's paradox. It's named after the Bible's King Solomon, who was famously adept at doling out sound advice, but not so good at following his own advice. He ended up having multiple concubines. There were like not just romantic triangles, like romantic octagons, and, MMA like battles that ultimately led his kingdom to unravel. But what we've learned is that there are certain tools that people can use to help coach them through their own problems, their own insecurities, like they were giving advice to someone else. And that can be really useful. Like, Colby, if you come to me with a problem, I can often see a solution and tell you what to do in ways that you can't do for yourself. And so we've learned that people can actually use language to help them coach themselves through a problem like they were another person. And it's a really simple thing. So we call it distanced self-talk. And it involves using your name to coach yourself through a problem. So I might think to myself, come on, Ethan, you can manage this situation. You're going to nail this against this other team. And what we find that does, when we use names, we typically use names when we're talking about others, right? Not ourselves. And so when we use our name to think about ourselves, that leads us to think about ourselves like we were another person. And it leads us to adopt a more inner coach-like mentality that's more challenge-oriented. It's not about, oh man, I'm never going to beat this team. It's like, yeah, I'm a really good athlete and my team's awesome. We're going to give it our best shot. And so we find that that distance self-talk promotes a more challenge-oriented mentality that we know enhances performance under stress. And it pushes people away from thinking in terms of a threat mentality, which is more about I can't do it. So they go from thinking I can't do it to I can do it. And we think that that's really powerful. And it turns out a lot of great athletes do this spontaneously. So, you'll see LeBron James. There was an incident of 10 years ago where he's facing a really tough decision. And he says, all right, I don't want to make an emotional decision. LeBron James got to do what is best for LeBron James. Or you see Tiger Woods coaching himself through a difficult stroke, right? Using his name. And so a lot of people stumble on this technique, I think, without really understanding how it works. We've now figured out how it works, and it's something that we can coach other people to use.
So, what about another situation where you've got, I mean, that tool sounds like it would apply to this one, but let's say, Oliver's and I have talked about this before, where you have certain guys that, and we'll use a lot of basketball examples today, but they struggle at the free throw line in games. So they spend a ton of time in the gym outside of games and practice, just practicing free throws, and they'll shoot lights out. But as soon as they get to the game, that they really, really struggle and still don't do well at the line. So what else could you advise someone in that situation to do besides distance self-talk?
So when anxiety occurs prior to a shot or some kind of high stakes situation, it zooms us in on the problem. And I talk about this in the book, and this was true for Ann Keel too. So when Ann Keel's inner critic or monster, activated, what it led him to do is start thinking about the complicated mechanics of his windup. And that's not what you want to be doing when you're trying to strike someone out, because windups, free throws, these are complicated behaviors that have been linked together over time, right? How you bend your knees and how you position your elbows and where your hands are and your release. There are many steps to sinking that hoop. And if you're on the line and you start thinking, all right, keep my knees here, elbow here, arm here, what happens is that a behavior that has become automatic through years and years and years and years of practice, you break it down. And when you break down that automatic habit, you are essentially removing the secret sauce that makes your player an NBA caliber player. And now they're back to being not even a rookie, but a beginner. And so that's something that you might do in practice if the shot isn't working. But when you're in front of the people in an arena, you want to try to just keep the inner monologue quiet. You want to just have the person instead just go up there, bounce it 3 times and shoot without thinking. And so that's the way to do that, or one way to do that is to try to silence that inner critic before you get to the free throw line. So nip the performance anxiety in the bud before they're even at the position where they have to take the shot. The way I do this for myself, I actually use distance self-talk. So I'm not doing free throws during the playoffs or the finals, but I do give speeches and lectures to lots of audiences, and sometimes they're meaner than the 1980s Charles Oakley, Anthony Mason Knicks. I'll tell you what, academia can be a brutal place. And so I can get, jitters too. And I have I have a bit of a ritual. Maybe we'll talk about rituals later, but I have a ritual that actually involves distance self-talk. Rituals on their own can be useful for harnessing our inner voice. And so I've blended a few techniques together, which I think is something that is also useful. I'll basically just, I'll channel my high school wrestling coach and I'll, say, all right. And I tell myself using my name what he used to tell me, and I say that, and I take a deep breath, and then I go, and then it quiets the inner doubts that would otherwise undermine performance. And I'm standing here today. It's gone okay. So So that would be an example of a ritual and distant self-talk combined.
Why don't we dive into rituals a little bit? Colby and I actually had a ritual of our own in the 13-14 season. We used to hand off a couple of pieces of gum before every game, and we ended up going 36-3. So I'm sure the gum had everything to do with it. But could you dive into the value of rituals and how much that can help people?
So rituals are a highly structured sequence of behaviors that people engage in. And research shows that they can be useful for quieting chatter. And before I talk about how they actually work, I'll break it down. I want to say sometimes we think about rituals. I think in popular culture, they're often equated with certain forms of psychopathology, like obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. In fact, and there is rituals are relevant to that condition, but that's an isolated instance, in my view, of a group of people taking an otherwise useful behavior and taking it to an extreme, right? Like if we think about everything we're talking about today as tools, right? The different tools for managing the mind. If we run with that metaphor for a bit, tools can be really helpful if you use them in the right context, but they can also be destructive if you abuse them. So take a hammer, right? Without a hammer, we wouldn't be able to build homes. But you can also use a hammer to destroy a home if you use it too hard, too often. And you also need to know when to use that hammer, right? So you use it to pound the nail, you don't use it to screw in the screw. So I think my hope is that when people read chatter and they learn about these different tools that exist, they start to think about when different tools work for them, like, and how to use them best in different situations. But back to rituals. So rituals are like a chatter fighting cocktail. They help us in a variety of different ways. And they're very prevalent in sports. Rafael Nadal, for example, often relies on rituals to manage the voice in his head on the court. So if you watch him play, you'll see that when he enters an arena, he always enters the same way, carrying a single tennis racket in his hand. He then approaches the bench assigned to him, turns to the crowd, unzips his jacket as he's bouncing on the balls of his feet. He places his water bottles in a perfect diagonal line to the court. And then he continues on, picking his shorts and twirling his hair before every serve and so forth and so on. He's very regimented. One way that they help him and others is by giving him a sense of control and order. When we're experiencing chatter, we often feel like we don't have control of our mind. Our thoughts are in control of us, and it's chaotic. It's pinging all over the place, right? We feel prisoners to our internal monologue. What we've learned is people can compensate for that experience of a lack of control by creating order in the world around them. And so when an athlete engages in a structured ritual, that gives them a sense of control. They're putting things like in a particular place, they're creating order. And that provides us with a sense of order that can be alleviating. So that's one way that rituals help. You don't have to do a ritual to benefit from this order effect. For example, I know when I experience moments of chatter, I'll just organize my office, and my office is usually a total mess. But when I'm struggling, I'll put things away neatly, and it does help. But rituals help us in lots of other ways too. So they also can distract us from our chatter. So the rituals we engage in are often highly complicated, right? Like you see certain players have these elaborate handshakes. I remember, I think it was to go back to LeBron years ago. I mean, he had one of these. It seemed like it took 2 minutes to get done with the fingers and the fists and the elbows and all the combinations. And so doing that requires some thinking. And so it's taking attention away from the chatter and focusing on this other behavior. That can have a temporary effect on boosting your control of chatter too. Then the final thing is that rituals. Well, actually, the penultimate. There are two more things. Rituals, we often do them with, especially in the sports context, with other other players and coaches, and they have a broader meaning, right? There's this significance. It's not about just me. It's about all of us together. And when it's about the team, not just me, that makes our own concerns feel a little bit smaller, right? So there's a shrinking of the self that occurs when we engage in these kinds of collective rituals that are very prevalent in sports. And so that's another pathway through which they work.
And so if I'm working with a guy who, I mean, I think about off the top of my head, we've talked about free throws, but a guy struggling from the free throw line, or we've talked about baseball, a pitcher who is, a baseball, obviously, you've got the break between every pitch where a pitcher may have a lot of thoughts go through their mind. A batter may have a lot of thoughts go through their mind, and I can think of a batter who's in a negative streak of striking out a bunch or not getting a hit in X amount of games. Would it be right to say that they should try to have a routine between, so after every single pitch you do the same thing, so you're limiting the inner voice, or between every pitch the batter steps back and does the same thing with his gloves, or a basketball player gets fouled and while they walk to the free throw line, they're doing the same thing every time while thinking in their head, and then at the free throw line they're having the same routine, so they're not allowing their voice to try to take over?
Yeah, and I think you see this happening organically quite a bit. Like if you look at, I think many basketball players, for example, have developed their own idiosyncratic rituals on the free throw line, right? Like they twirl the barrel, they let the ball, they spin it back and let it bounce 3 times, bounce, shoot, right? Like, I mean, you tell me, you have much more exposure, but I would imagine just my experience observing as a fan, I see that quite a bit. It's true in baseball too. You step 1 foot outside the batter's box, twirl your bat, rub the top, and then go back. If a player is struggling, I think it doesn't hurt to try this and see if it makes a difference. With all of these tools, you can try them and see different tools may work for different players in different situations. And I think we need to, one thing that I do feel strongly about is there are no single magic bullets, single magic tools, right? That's why I talk about the universe of tools that science has unearthed, because I think the challenge for players is to figure out, and people more generally, what are the specific tools that really work for me? And so, my advice is to try a ritual. And if that works, run with it. And if not, there are other things you could do.
If you enjoy this podcast, I also write a weekly newsletter sharing the best content I found in the last week that directly applies to coaches. Some of the best coaches in the world subscribe, and it's free. So go to coachingcoaches.substack.com or check out the link in the show notes to subscribe. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.substack.com. Let's get back to the episode.
One of the things you talked about was almost like a chatter board of advisors.
Yeah.
And being selective with people that may be able to help you with different areas. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. I spend some time in the book talking about this. So other people can be an amazing asset or vulnerability to us when it comes to our chatter. When we experience chatter, we are often intensely motivated to talk to other people about our feelings so that we can get help. But not any conversation with another person, a teammate or a coach, actually has a beneficial effect. Right? Sometimes our conversations can actually make our chatter worse. And so let me break down how that works. When we are going to someone else for help, there are 2 things that we need from them. The first is we need support. We need to know that there's someone there who cares enough about us that they're willing to actually hear us, listen to us, really engage empathically with us as individuals. So, me knowing, Oliver, that you're there to listen to my story, my anxiety at the free throw line, like that makes me feel good to know that there's someone there who cares enough about me that they're willing to take the time to listen. And to do that, I have to tell you about what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. But just sharing what I'm feeling and my anxiety, just venting, in and of itself, that is not sufficient. That makes me feel closer and more connected to you. I really like you as my coach, but it doesn't help me solve the problem, right? And a lot of the conversations we have with others, they stop at the venting point, right? It's just about, oh yeah, oh, get it out, man. Just like unload. That doesn't fix the chatter. And there is a lot of research showing that venting alone, at best, does nothing. And at worst, actually makes the chatter worse, because when I'm venting, you're asking me questions about what I'm feeling, experiencing. That's like adding fuel to the fire. You're just getting me to relive these painful experiences over and over. So what ideally you want to find in another person, in a chatter advisor, so to speak, is someone who shows you they care, they take the time to listen, but then they try to help you zoom out, right? When we're experiencing chatter, we're so tunnel vision focused on this problem, we can't think of alternative ways to fix it. Like, if I'm talking to someone, they come to me with an issue, I might say to them, well, you've missed some free throws before. You got over it, right? So what's the big deal? We get over it. Like, that's shifting the perspective right there. Or if I say to you, oh, that's terrible. I went through something similar when I was playing. Or, I had this other player who also, and here's how they managed the situation. They started doing a ritual. And so what I'm doing there is I'm shifting the perspective. I'm broadening it. I'm making it clear that there are alternative ways to think about things. I'm giving you hope. I'm giving you solutions. And the most effective forms of social support do that, right? They both show you that they care, plus they also help broaden your perspective. And so what I tell people is to be really deliberate about who you choose to go to for chatter support, right? Like, I think really carefully about this in my own life. There are lots of people who I love very much and who love me who I don't go to for help, because I know they're just going to make it worse, or they're not going to help. And said there are other people that I consistently go to for support, and they help. So I like to think of this as like building a board of advisors for help in different domains that you might need it.
I think about this being applied to, you have a head coach who a player messes up in a game. The coach screams at him, takes him out of the game. The player comes out. They sit on the bench. They pout. They say, go talk to Oliver. He's going to help you through it. And so coaches then have to deal with the same situation of, you don't want to just let the player vent. You also want to help provide a solution. How do you suggest people work through the balance, almost a tightrope, of wanting to address both the emotional need and like the cognitive solution of the issue? Because to me, that would depend on, Oliver may barely need emotional support and we can get to the issue, but John Doe may need a lot of emotional support and then we get to the issue.
This is where the art of social support comes into play. And it is an art. And I would say that I think this is also probably what distinguishes some of the great coaches from the not great coaches, right? Because different people, so right after an emotion is triggered, it can be hard to go right into that cognitive element, right? People often need a little bit of time before they're receptive to thinking differently about the experience. Right after something happens, they just want to vent. But the amount of time you need before you can start having your perspective broaden, that's different for every person. So it might be 60 seconds for me. It might be 60 minutes for you. And I think one of the things that coaches or, loved ones, chatter advisors more generally need to be sensitive to is, all right, who am I talking to? And what's their profile, right? So do I need to wait a little while before I try to give this person that big picture support? Or can I intervene right away? That's going to vary from person to person. Interestingly enough, while researching the book, I discovered I spoke to some FBI, the former chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. And I write a little bit about this. It turns out that what I'm describing here is very similar to how hostage negotiators talk to people who've taken hostages, right? Like, you're trying to first connect with them emotionally, and then once you do, you then can slowly help broaden their perspective and engage in a kind of problem solving. And if you think about it, like, in many situations, people who take hostages are quite emotional, right? And so there's actually a proof of evidence of this working, not just in the lab, but you can see it working in these crime fighting organizations around the world.
I think it's interesting when you talked about the quick response or a delayed response. And at one point in the book, you talked about social media,
Yeah.
and how prevalent this is now, that the rapid response is just at your fingertips.
Yeah. So, I think about social media as providing people with a giant megaphone for their inner voice, right? If you think about Facebook, it literally says what's on your mind, right? It's beckoning us to reveal. And social media is fascinating, right? Because, well, let me back up. Social media it is a new environment that we spend a lot of time engaging in. And environments are not good or bad. Whether they help or harm us depend on how we engage with those environments. So in the physical world, right? Like if I go into a bad neighborhood and say the wrong thing to the wrong people, I can get in big, big trouble. But if I go in another neighborhood and have other kinds of conversations, they can enrich my life. And I think we're learning that applies to social media too. There are ways of interacting with social media that can be really helpful for getting people chatter support. But there are ways of interacting with it that can be harmful too, that can provoke things like cyberbullying and trolling, and also make us feel inadequate and insecure. And so that's where I think science is really helpful, because what science is beginning to do is provide us with a roadmap to think about, all right, how do we interact with these spaces in healthy versus harmful ways? We learn that information when it comes to the physical world early on from our parents and our friends. Like, your parents are teaching you, here's how you navigate the world to succeed. But I don't know about you, but I didn't get those lessons from my parents when it came to social media 15 years ago. And I'm now giving them to my kids, but I also do research on this topic. So I know a little bit about it. And so I do think it's important to start socializing kids, people, players into how to use these technologies the healthy way. Now, to get back to your question, that was a bit of a detour. When we experience strong emotions of the kind that fuel chatter, we're often intensely motivated to share them with other people. Now, in the real world, there are certain constraints that shape the way we share our feelings with others. For one, you got to find someone to talk to. And that often takes time, right? Like, okay, Oliver, are you available like to talk to me? You may be in a meeting. Maybe I can't talk to you in the exact moment that I want you to speak to me. And we know that as time passes, emotions tend to fade, right? They tend to reduce. And so simply by the passage of time, our emotions tend to come down from their peak. Once I do find someone to talk to in the offline world, there also it is a back and forth in which I'm continually getting information from you as I say things. So as I'm talking right now, I can see your face, and I can see the micro expressions that communicate to me that, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that because I'm hurting your feelings, or that was inappropriate. Or if we're talking on the phone, I can hear the quiver in your voice if I say something inappropriate or insensitive. On social media, all of that information, which is so vital for keeping us civilized, if you will, right, in discourse, it's missing. So what do we have? By virtue of smartphones, the moment we are at our peak, we can pick up our phone and we can share how we feel. And we don't have any information coming back to constrain how we share. And so that's one of the reasons why I think we see so often people getting into a lot of trouble on social media, saying things to others that they would never say in daily life to someone else, to someone else's face. And I think for athletes, professional athletes in particular, that's a really big problem. And so, educating them about how social media works in the way that it can encourage you to be very free in what you say, I think that can be a useful nugget to deliver. So that's one way that social media can allow us to express our inner voice in ways that might not be optimal. But I will say, you can get support from social media in ways that is astounding and that we simply can't get in the offline world. And that's something to keep in mind too, because it can be a real tool when we're experiencing chatter.
And then, so how do you, if someone's listening to this, wondering if, I mean, we talked about athletes using it, right? They have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers sometimes. Coaches, same boat. There's a reason you have a Twitter account and Instagram, right? It could be recruiting. It could be developing your brand over time and sharing things, whether you are a coach or an athlete. But then you also have the drawbacks of social media. And then you have, after a loss, if you look at, someone's mentions, like last night I'm watching the Florida-Vanderbilt game. Vanderbilt loses. I'm sure Jerry Stackhouse, the Vanderbilt coach, just was getting ripped in his mentions. That if, like you said, if it was in public, I don't know Jerry Stackhouse. I'd probably knock whoever's saying those things out just in protection of him because it's horrible. So how do you suggest people think about the balance of, I want to have an account because it has benefits, but I also don't want to have an account because it's got some really nasty drawbacks?
Well, so number one, I think every person player has to do a kind of cost benefit analysis for themselves about social media and whether the benefits outweigh the costs with respect to using it, right? Some people are really affected negatively by it. And if that's exerting a toll on you and creating chatter, then I think it's worth considering not using it directly or for example, having a handler help you with it, right? Which often happens too. What I do and what I think, what I encourage others to do is to try to use it strategically. That is, try to take what we know about what does the science tell us about ways that social media can improve your well-being, can improve your business. Try to use it more in those ways and minimize the usage that is bringing you down, right? So we know that passively scrolling through other people's feeds can lead us to feel bad because we tend to curate how we present ourselves. So we're mostly sharing the high points, right? Like on Instagram and even on Twitter, maybe to some degree. And when we look at someone else's Instagram, we see MVP, All-Star. And then, oh man, I'm just a 280 batter making 10 million a year. God damn it. I'm joking. But the social comparison, like we are creatures of social comparison, right? We're doing that all the time. And so if we thrust ourselves in worlds where we are bathing in the glorified lives of others, and we know how ordinary our lives are or how seemingly ordinary, that can lead people to feel worse. And so maybe you use social media more actively. So you're putting information out there, you're trying to connect with people, but you're not spending a whole lot of time scrolling through others' news feeds and grids. Like that would be one very, very basic recommendation.
So no doom scrolling.
No doom scrolling.
I want to go back to the addressing emotional and cognitive needs. I don't know if your research touches on this, but I mean, I think everyone can think about a player that is just so emotional when things don't go their way that it's almost like they're just like a lost cause, maybe for that day, that practice. Have you done any research or have any knowledge on how to help coach someone to shrink that amount of emotional support they need to then address the cognitive need quicker?
Well, a lot of the research we do is about turning the temperature down, right? And so the idea is that when the temperature gets too hot, when the emotions really flare, it becomes difficult to reason objectively, to be rational. And so in those instances, what you want to do is you want to give people a little mental space, help them distance themselves from the experience, step back, right? Like lots of research on stepping back. And the reason we think stepping back is useful is that it just brings that temperature down just a little. It doesn't make people like who've just experienced something stressful, like super happy, life is great, but it's making them less stressed and more amenable to cognitive interventions, to rethinking in ways that can ultimately help them better. So it's like taking a lot of the tools that I talk about. these aren't happy pills. I don't think happy pills really exist, right? And I don't think you should take happy pills actually, because negative emotions are really, really useful. Like, I want to experience a little bit of anxiety before a high stakes performance. Like, that motivates me to prepare for that performance and to perform well. So you don't want to rid your life of negative emotions. You just want to not have them be so all consuming that you can't do anything else. And so a lot of the tools bring the temperature down and make people more receptive to those kinds of cognitive interventions.
And what if you're working or trying to give advice to someone in a situation where you know they need that advice? They will be better off if they get that advice, but they are not in a position to take it, or they do not want to hear it.
Yeah, well, this is so I talk about this too, and I think it's a great point. Unsolicited advice can backfire, right? If someone doesn't ask for it and you volunteer it, it can actually lead to defensiveness, because the person thinks like, yeah, you must think I'm an idiot. I'm a shit, right? Like, I didn't ask for your help. Like, you see this happening all the time with parents and their kids, right? Parents, all they want for their kids is to be happy. They offer them advice. Like my daughters, like, sweetie, let me help you tie your shoe. That's not the way you do it. Let me show you. It's much easier. I didn't ask you for help, Daddy. Why do you have to, Mom? Like, and it all unravels. But, this happens at other stages too, right? I've seen this happen with adults and their parents. And I'm sure it happens with coaches and athletes as well. And so in those instances, there are other ways of helping. We call it invisible forms of support. And there are many different flavors that can take. The idea is you're indirectly helping the person in need. You're not coming up and saying, hey, here's what you should do. You could do lots of other things, for everything as simple as, let's say you have an athlete that's really stressed, right? For whatever reason, you try to make their life a little bit easier. So it transport it to my home. I can generalize there. Like my wife, kids are doing stuff. There's her work, right? She's at her wit's end. I can try to make the circumstance less stressful for her by picking up the groceries and cooking dinner, right? That's an instance of she's not asking me for help, but I'm proactively doing things to make it easier for her. And you can imagine lots of ways in which a team could do that for their players. And I'm sure many teams try to make their players' lives easier without them being asked to do so. But then there are other more sophisticated kinds of invisible support. So let's say an athlete is struggling, or a person is struggling with something. They don't ask you for help. You're in a team meeting and maybe you talk about, like, generally, hey, look, guys, this is a situation that happens a lot and I just want to address it. And this has happened to me and here's how I've managed it. So you're not singling out that player. You're just talking in general terms, right? About, like, here's a way of solving this kind of situation. So you're giving them the information they need. You're making them aware of it, but you're not shining a spotlight on their vulnerability. So I do think people have to be really careful about, it's great to give advice when you're asked for it, and we often are. But if you're not asked for it, then there are other ways of indirectly helping that can still be useful.
Something else you touched on was the physical touch, and maybe it's giving somebody a high five after they don't do well, and that made me think of, I want to say it was an academic study that was done whatever year the Mavs beat the Heat in the finals. I want to say it was 2010 and
it was
2011, and it looked at all of the times a team touched during the year. So I guess it was high five, back slaps, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And the team that did it the most that year was the Mavs, and the team that won the title was the Mavs. And now, while correlation doesn't equal causation, as you know as an academic, I just thought that was really interesting. And do you think that could have some validity to encourage the physical touch over time?
So touch is fascinating, right? And it's tricky to talk about in the current Me Too era, but there's a lot of data which shows that touch, affectionate touch, whether it be a high five between teammates, a pat, on the back, or a hug, this can help us. This is an invisible way of helping us of combating chatter, and it does so through a few different pathways. When people when you feel an affectionate embrace from another person, there is an automatic release of chemicals, oxytocin and other chemicals that can lift our mood, right? And so through those automatic pathways, you can get some chatter relief. But when you engage in these high fives and hugs, there's also the recognition that this person cares about me. Like, I have a team. And that way of thinking, that attribution, can also be really powerful for helping us manage our insecurities and anxiety. So touch is a powerful tool. You just need to make sure it's not creepy or unwanted. And I would not advocate either of those.
So last night, it was a crazy night in the Donovan house. It was, so just for people listening, it's Thursday, or we're recording on a Thursday. So Wednesday night was crazy night. My wife and I at 8:00 were watching you and Angela Duckworth have a conversation about the book. And she helps kids kind of navigate the transition of aging out of foster care. And she brought up this idea, and I wanted to get your thought on it because I think it applies to a lot of things. And it's an example of someone anticipating going to the experience of something, or someone thinking about an experience they've had and the negative chatter that it goes along with it. And it may be a situation where there's not a lot of, they can zoom out, but what are they zooming out to? Like, they can't go think about, well, John has experienced this, because they don't know any other John. And to me, this could be, I think a lot of traumatic issues that players have dealt with that coaches may want to help them work through. It could be a sibling who was killed. It could be physical abuse. It could be mental, verbal, sexual abuse. All these things where they can't go to think about zooming out to that thing. And I think with the mental health stuff now, it's getting easier because you've got people like Kevin Love and Michael Phelps talking about it more. So if I'm an athlete and I'm experiencing like severe anxiety or depression, I can at least zoom out and think about it in that way. But what advice do you have for trying to help someone go through an experience like that where there isn't a lot of other similarities? The only thing I could think of was trying to connect them with someone that you can find who's been through a similar experience.
Well, so a couple of things. So first of all, the book is written for the everyday kind of problems of living and chatter that I think characterize all of us at times. There are clearly clinical manifestations of chatter in the form of clinical forms of anxiety and depression, where there are more heavy-handed interventions that I don't talk about. The tools that I talk about in chatter, a lot of them are used in therapy, but there's a more intensive way of bringing other people to help you when you're really, really at that clinical point, which I talk a little bit about advocating for. So if a player is finding themselves clinically distressed, then I think they definitely want to find an empirically supported therapist to work with. With respect to what can you do if people are managing like really unique situations, I think there are still ways of putting their experiences in perspective without trivializing them, right? Like, broadening your perspective doesn't just mean that finding someone else who's been through the same thing as you, right? Like, that could be that might be normalizing it to say, hey, Colby, you're not alone. Lots of other people feel this way and they've managed it. That's one way of broadening your perspective. But there are other ways of doing it too, like, hey, but wait a second. Let's talk about your situation here and look at how amazing you're doing, right? It could have gone a totally different way for you, right? You could have been in this, but instead you're here. So that's just one example, but there are so many different ways of trying to help people reframe. Fundamentally, what we're trying to have people do is, there's something that's bothering them a lot. How do we change the way they think about that issue so it's no longer a constant reverberating source of distress. And there are different ways of chipping away at that to help people reframe those experiences. Finding others who have experienced the same thing is only one way to do it. There are lots of other ways too.
I think for me, one thing that I thought was really interesting when you talked about reframing and the benefits of nature and having these feelings of awe, I think for our listeners, either in like a team building setting or a staff building setting, talk about the shrinking of self, how that could be beneficial.
Yeah, I find this fascinating. So what scientists have learned is that experiencing the emotion of awe, which is an emotion we experience when we're in the presence of something vast that we have trouble explaining. So a lot of people get it from nature. Like you look up at the stars in the sky and you think, oh my God, there are billions of stars out there. Like I have trouble processing that. Like, how is it possible there are that many stars? There's this like, it's awe inspiring, right? Other people get it from, looking at a skyscraper or even thinking about an airplane. Like at one point in life, we were in loincloths struggling to create fires. And now we figured out how to build these giant tin cans, aluminum, fiberglass, and like blast someone off into the sky and then land them safely. Like mind blower. Like how does that happen, right? What we know is that when people experience the emotion of awe, and when we're contemplating something really vast and indescribable, that makes us and our own concerns feel a whole lot smaller. And that's a good thing when it comes to chatter, right? Like here I am worrying about this thing that's relevant to me when there's a whole universe out there of things that are important, right? So seeking out awe-inspiring experiences can be helpful, and you can get them from lots of different ways, like going on a retreat to an amazing natural setting, or like I said before, some people get it from like looking at great art or architecture. And so, finding what triggers an experience of awe in you and then trying to cultivate those experiences can be helpful for managing chatter.
It made me think of when I read it, I finished Nick Nurse's book, The Raptors Coach, a couple months ago, and he talked about, and I don't remember all the things that he did, but just trying to do kind of Phil Jackson-esque of having the team do things that you wouldn't really expect the team to do. Like he took the team to see Hamilton when they played in New York City, and just doing those kind of outside the box things. And I had thought about the benefits of that in perspective of the idea of awe and feeling smaller, that you're part of a bigger thing. But I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, emphasizing like the collective too is a way of providing that experience, those team building experiences. I know here at Michigan, Harbaugh, our coach, does a lot of that. I don't know how you feel about our coach coming from Florida, but probably don't want to get into that. I'm a big fan.
I have one more question for you before I get to my typical end of episode questions. And is there I was listening to Dr. Jim Lair had a podcast appearance on Tim Ferriss's podcast recently that was phenomenal. And he talked about, he'll tell when he works with people, he'll say, think about how you talk to yourself sometimes, and what would you think if you had to put that on a billboard for everyone to see? That's what you say to yourself. And it just made me think about how nasty, at least Colby Donovan can be really nasty to Colby Donovan sometimes. Why is it? Is it an evolutionary thing that we haven't evolved to, that we still do that? Like, why do we sometimes talk so negatively towards ourselves when we wouldn't talk that way to others?
Well, that observation is interesting. That question on multiple levels. Like number one, it really speaks to, I think, the why distant self-talk can be so effective, right? Because we're talking to ourselves like we're talking to someone else, and God, it just seems like it's a lot easier to do that. So we don't have the same social norms don't exist for how we talk to ourselves, right? Like we learn at young age to be respectful to others. We don't necessarily learn to be respectful to ourselves in the same way. But there's a flip side to that too, right? Which is, I would venture to guess that a lot of us don't say things to others that maybe we should say if we're being totally honest, right? Like we don't want to hurt their feelings. Yet for ourselves, honesty can be really good, right? Because it can often protect us from things. Like if we really, really, really screwed up, we don't, I think you want to own that to some degree so you can move on, right? Like, let me throw this back to you, Colby. Like if you see a friend like really, really tank a performance, are you going to tell them you really, really stunk? I mean, or are you going to dress it up a little bit? I don't know.
I would probably try to be a little nicer and then offer some opportunities for growth in a very kind, gentle way.
And well, there you go, right? And so, but for yourself, you can be a little bit more severe about it. And so the trick is, I think, look, negative self-talk on its own isn't a bad thing. Like it's, I think, a good thing to be able to review your life and review the negative things so you can learn from them. I tell the story in the book, Chatter, about a woman, a neuroanatomist who had a stroke and lost her ability to talk to herself. And initially she thought this was great because no more negative verbal thoughts. But turned out that a few days later, she realized this wasn't so great because without language, she wasn't who she was. She lost her identity and her ability to problem solve and make sense of the world. And so we don't want to rid ourselves of negativity. What we want to do is prevent the negative thoughts from morphing into the chatter, into the negative cycle of thinking and feeling that's unproductive and never ends.
So I lied. I have one other question for you, and it's because I have a quiet house with no kids. But as I look at Oliver, he's got a few of his own at home. You've talked about your 6-year-old. What advice do you have for parents to help try to encourage just the ability to kind of handle chatter within their kids as they grow up over time?
Well, I think there are two things that parents can do. One is to teach kids about how the mind works with respect to chatter. And I think this is actually, this goes back to a point I wanted to make, but forgot to say about that athlete you mentioned earlier, who's so emotional that, you don't know when you can intervene. I think there's power in knowing. I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize how much control they have over their mind. The other day, my older daughter was upset and she was crying, and I said to her, like, you don't have to be upset. We can change. What if we think about it this way? Rather than thinking, what if this happens? What if we tell ourselves, so what if it happens? Right? You shift from what if to so what. That's a basic jujitsu psychological technique for reducing anxiety. And that was just something that she didn't realize was possible. I think simply recognizing that here's how an emotion works, and it's going to have a specific time course, but there are ways of reining it in, and here are the things you can do. I think teaching kids and people about that can be helpful. And then, of course, there are certain techniques you can try working with your kids. Like we've done some research on something called the Batman effect, which is when kids are struggling with a difficult task, you ask them to imagine they're their favorite superhero and tell them, hey, what would Batman do if they were really struggling with their sister right now? What would Batman say? Or Dora the Explorer? Call yourself Batman. And what that does is it gives the kids a little bit of space. It's not them anymore. They're a superhero. So we give them some distance. But we also have them emulate a person who doesn't easily give up, right? Like Batman doesn't lose, Batman wins. And so I wouldn't advocate the Batman effect with, the NBA necessarily. There are more sophisticated ways of bottling that mechanism. But with kids, I think there's some evidence showing that can work. We can also, one other thing I'll just say, we can also be our kids' placebos. So I spent some time talking about the power of belief, which is truly magical in the sense that there's a lot of evidence that if I give you a sugar pill and I say this is going to make you feel better and have less chatter, and you believe me, it has that effect. And we see this time and again. And so you could do that with your kids. Like when your kids are really struggling and worrying, like be their placebo, right? Like give them hope, right? You don't want to lie or be irrational about things, but to the extent that you can console them and say, you are going to get through this difficult exam. Trust me, I know it. Like giving them that kind of encouragement, there's science behind that saying that it can be really helpful. So those are two things you could do.
There you go, Oliver. There's your homework.
I need it. Believe me.
Well, Ethan, before we get to the end of episode questions, where can people go? I will link Chatter in the show notes. They can go buy it. But where can people follow you as well if they want to, or connect with you?
They can go to my website, www.ethankross.com. It's Cross with a K, Kross. And they can learn about the book. They can learn about my lab, me, at that site. And if they're interested in reading Chatter, they can find it at any bookstore, online, or if they're allowed to leave their house, they could find it in a brick and mortar shop too.
So first question for you, what's one book every coach should read? And I say this every time that I have the same questions, and I change them every time. So I'm actually going to change that one for you. If someone really loved all of the information we talked about today, what's another book that they should read based on that?
Oh, there's so many. So my buddy Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, is great. Carol Dweck's Mindset is great. Those are some classics. Dave DeSteno has some really interesting books on psychology that are relevant. You're putting me on the spot here because I got lots of buddies who write these books.
Pick your favorite child.
Those are ones that I just happen to have looked at recently. Here's another one, Quiet by Susan Cain,
Okay.
Which is about the power of introversion. And I think, not all athletes are necessarily looking for the spotlight, and that puts a little bit of a different perspective on how to interact with more introverted athletes. So that would be a good one too.
Who's one person you think would make for a good guest on the podcast?
Jim Harbaugh.
Let's get it done, Jim. Come on. What's one area you're looking to improve in over the next year?
Personally?
Yep.
Spending more time with my kids.
What's popular advice you hear people say you think is wrong?
Vent your emotions to improve your chatter.
It's a good one. I've heard that before. What advice do you have for young coaches who are listening to this?
My advice to young coaches is to not underestimate the power that the conversations we have with ourselves have on athletes' lives, their performance, but also their well-being. And I think that trying to help them harness those conversations can be helpful for multiple reasons.
Last question for you. What's the darkest moment you experienced professionally, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, you 15 seconds, right? Darkest moment I ever experienced professionally was, I actually write about this in the book, when I got a threatening letter in the mail that that was not pleasant to have to deal with, and was really, really anxiety provoking for quite a few days. And so that was not fun.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad you wrote the book. It was a phenomenal read. Oliver and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, this is so much fun, guys. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on the show.
You've been listening to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and receive our world-class newsletter in your inbox every Sunday. You can access both of those at coachingcoaches.co. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.co.